So as we come to the end this evening, would anyone like to ask any questions or make any comments or ask for clarification on anything? If I come over, you can always unmute now. All I can see where I'm sitting is lots of serious looking faces. Serious looking faces and people who
Fascinating, Kristen. Thank you again. You've obviously got a lot of your information from books which are not in the scriptures, early writings, I guess, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you, in those other kind of references that you got, is there any reference to Joseph, Jesus' father? Because we know that he wasn't at the crucifixion, so therefore we assume he died by then. We know he was older than Mary, so it could have been old age. But do you have any references anywhere as to what?
Strangely, he doesn't get a huge number. Pardon me. We know that. Pardon me. He's very consistently he's referred to as Clopas' brother, who we're going to see in the resurrection narratives. And there are references to him, but they are part of the Golden Legend, which is a bit later. So I don't take them so seriously, of being also Zebedee's brother. So Zebedee, Clopas, but I think they seem to come later. They don't go back early. So we don't actually know. There's no reference to him, even legendarily, that I'm aware of how he dies or anything like that. The point you make generally, though, is there are the computerization has actually meant there's a vast amount of information that is coming out that's only coming out in the last few years, almost, or the last 20 years. I remember the first guy, I actually went and heard a lecture by him once, who started to digitize issues of ancient documents for comparing with the gospel. But as that process has taken place, every single one of the Dead Sea Scrolls has been released digitally now. So things like that, people talk about, they've been hidden. It's not true. They're all available to search and so on. And what it means is that people can casually and easily find connections which before would take 20 years of research, because you can go and do searches on these things if you have the right connections to the right academic sources. So some of what I shared tonight, which was newish, I found the other day. Well, holding it up. There you go. This is the Women Named in the Gospel by Richard Balcombe. That would normally cost about 40 quid, but it was being got rid of by a library for £1.95. I noticed. so I bought it, and I've had a quick flick through. I haven't read it all yet. But actually, Richard Balcombe is someone who's does quite a lot where, like he reported, although he didn't do the research, this thing of the statistical variances of names and regression analyses on the Gospels, which sound very boring, but they are what kind of effectively. It's very difficult now to claim that the Gospels weren't written in the first century, just simply because of the names match perfectly with the statistical distribution of names in the styles and so on, and the classes that people have. So that kind of stuff is going on all the time now. So it's a bit like in both the areas of science and also in archaeology. The just to be aware, the more that gets done, the more ridiculous claims that don't take the Bible seriously fall apart. I grew up. I even wrote in a couple of years ago in the beginning of the book of Exodus how standard archaeology says that Jericho was destroyed the way it says in the Bible, but it was in the wrong century. Well, about 3 years ago, that was turned over. So that is no longer the case. It now happens at exactly the right time. And that's because of things like the statistical analysis of pottery, of all boring things. So they've analysed pottery more. They've got finer details on when various bits of pottery styles were invented. And so if you find a piece of pottery and you can look at it and say, the textures and the mix is like this, therefore it fits here. Well, that has just turned over what I grew up with, which is the walls of Jericho really did fall in, like it says in the Bible, but it happened 400 years before the Israelites turned up. Now it happens in the 14th century at just the right time. So actually, as archaeology is improving, we're finding it fits better, and the documentary evidence is now so much easier to search. So again, when I started doing these things, I used to get references secondhand from books like this, Now when I find them, I can normally find a free translation of the thing that's cited and go and read them for myself. And then you sometimes find things that weren't put in the secondary sources. So it's a fascinating kind of field. And I'm not claiming to be massively clever in doing it. I'm just saying because I've got a bit of a framework, I can now kind of go and find these things and start fitting them together. Whereas if I'd been 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to get hold of them. So sorry, that was a longer answer than you wanted, Barry. Anyone else like to ask anything or say anything? Let's go there.
Chris, I'm interested, just as the way that this is sort of like sort of progressed, that there seems to be sort of like relatively small number of groups that are very sort of intrinsically linked within a population of about, I think you mentioned about 50,000. And it's fascinating how sort of, when you first read the Bible, it seems like there's a whole bunch of sort of like strangers that suddenly come together. Whereas actually they seem, I'm correct in sort of interpreting the fact that it just seem to be actually, it's a train of sort of connections that are already established that just seem to sort of come together.
Yeah, so the estimates have ranged up to 200,000 from 40,000 for Jerusalem, but it's probably somewhere around 100,000. But if you think about that number, that's not dissimilar to the number that live in Maidenhead, where I live, probably not dissimilar to Wokingham. And actually, there are loads of people, where you are, Richard, but who you'll sort of know because you recognise them from the coffee shop. And actually, we spend far more time in our homes now than people did in the past. So in the past, where they would go out into the town centres and all be transferring, you wouldn't necessarily know everybody, but certainly there would be significant people, and your degrees of separation would be very, very small in a town like even as one of the world's major cities, which it was in the ancient world, Jerusalem, because it was such a key thoroughfare. Obviously, you got 3 continents all come together at that point. So it's always been a biggish city. But even in that context, for a big city in the ancient world, when you've got a handful of key centres and locations and people revolving around them, there'll be lots of folks who know each other only a couple of degrees away from each other. So, and it's interesting because you get 2 sides. Is a huge numbers of people do have similar names. That's quite common, as we found out, that amongst the non-ruling class, the ruling classes like unusual names, which is why Nicodemus and so on seems to be maintained in the single family. But there are also these common names, and normal people have those a lot. So you can't say because you meet someone called Simon here and someone called Simon there that they're always the same. But equally, when you find them kind of playing around in the same circles. So that's illustration I gave you of Joanna and Juniah, I actually find quite convincing. I find it a very convincing argument. Doesn't sound like it when you first encounter it, but actually if you look at the unusual use of the word apostle that Paul puts there in that phrase, she's not just someone who's worked with him, which maybe that Mary's not the one, I don't know, but actually he refers to them as note among the apostles and people who were before him in Christ and similar and his countrymen, but they've got Roman names. So if they're his countrymen with Roman names, they almost certainly had a Jewish name, which they use in Jewish circles, and this is the name they use in Roman circles. And like Paul, people often, that was one of the key things, is you do it something that rhymes and sounds similar. So I think it's quite a strong case, and equally, the fact that Luke uses her as one of his people who starts and finishes his eyewitness testimony, what they call the eyewitness inclusio. He puts her at the beginning, he puts her at the end, tells us that in his mind she's a significant character. So I, as I say, that things like that, I think we're putting those pictures together as time goes by. So good. Any other things that people would like to ask or say or observe on?
No, just picking up on Richard's point, I heard someone once say that as many as 6 or 7 of the 12 disciples could actually have been related.
Yes,
and he
that's right.
all of the family trees to prove that.
Yeah, Yep. So this is where the common names mean some of them are a bit more just an association by a common name. So Levi, son of Alphaeus. So Matthew's father is called Alphaeus. Alphaeus is one of the ways of translating the Hebrew name Chalphai, which is probably Clopas, Cleopas, who's also married. We know that at least two of the other disciples were from someone called Alphaeus as well. Therefore, are they the same or are they different? We don't know. They seem to not be presented closely together, but you can put them all together, and you're absolutely right. You can find those connections. Yeah. So, and yeah, I think I've always found it quite encouraging. It's I found when I started to do it, my tendency was to assume, therefore, everything was together. As time goes on, you realise sometimes, no, it also makes sense that they're not the same people, but you try and balance the two. So good. Well, I'm glad that there's stuff there that hopefully that's fresh for lots of folks, because then it feels like, yeah, okay, well, I've learnt something useful this evening, or interesting at least. But just a quick throwaway here. But I had a conversation with someone, totally different context. So I'm beginning to make plans in my head to go and reconnoiter in Israel, to go and take a trip with someone who actually planned some pilgrimages in some other places. So we're going to perhaps go together, with a view to, if we can find some good ways of doing it, it might be nice to take a little bit of a group in a year or so's time. If we can get out and kind of, on a personal level, I don't want to go and see the tourist places, but I do want to stand in some of the kind of key locations and just sort of stand there and feel and look around and take my own photographs and so on. So if you're enjoying this, keep an eye out for the next wave where maybe we actually go and kind of walk from see if we can walk from Jericho to Jerusalem in a day or something, So good. Well, would anyone else like to ask anything, or should we draw it to a close there? Okay, well, I'll take your silence as to mean we'll move on. So it's been
fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. Yeah. Good. Well, I'll stop the recordings then.